A few years ago, I started a year challenge which I called Deb's 2021 Space Odyssey. I'd been neglecting science fiction, which was my first reading love. I'd been reading a lot of Australian fiction, classics, things like that. So I thought I'd revisit sci-fi, both new and old. And as part of that year, I was determined to reread a book that I remembered from many years ago. I read it in the 80s. The very classic Make Room by the absolutely amazing author Harry Harrison. Harry Harrison is one of those authors where I don't think I've ever read anything by his that I didn't enjoy. I can't read enough. I don't really understand why he isn't a better known author. You've got other authors from this era that are much better known and books that have got far higher accolades given to them when their writing just isn't as good as this, in my opinion. So Make Room is a book from 1966, but it's set in the incredibly distant future of 1999. It has been very popularized by a movie. It was a Grimm movie. It was called Soylent Green, and the movie was so well known compared to the book that when I first tried to get my hands on this, I went to the local library. And the librarian ended up arguing with me over the title of the book. I was saying, it's called Make Room. It's by Harry Harrison. It got turned into a movie. The movie was known as Soylent Green. She started arguing with me that the book was named Soylent Green as well. She did apologise later. Okay, so that movie is based on the book in only the loosest possible fashion. I vaguely remember the book. I vaguely remembered the movie, which I did actually see, but the book left a much stronger impact on me having read it. So as I said, it's set in the far future of 1999, and the central theme was a dire warning of where overpopulation, environmental degradation, and resources hoarding was going to take society. And in the foreword to this one, which was published, I think, in 2008, the author actually reviews how well his predictions did, which weren't terribly well. I wonder how many people actually remember 1999 and the year 2000 bug that was meant to make entire civilizations collapse. The banking was all going to collapse. None of the computers would know how to switch from 1999 to 2000, and as a result, world was going to go into dystopia. It never happened. I'm not terribly sorry about that, really. Anyway, back to the book. The world building is out and out amazing. It has a few central characters. It has a lot of central characters that are well described, actually, but it revolves around a very few of them. And each one of them gives us a different aspect of the world. So the world building in the book is far, far superior to what you see in the movie. Though, of course, you've got the visual superiority of the movie. Okay, the main character is Manhattan Police Detective Andy Roosh, who is an employed detective, so he's a upper echelon of society in some regards. And as a higher echelon society, you'd expect his living conditions to be quite comfortable. Now, for his world, they are. But by looking at the squalor he has to live in, the lack of electricity, the lack of water, the shortages of food and other resources that he has at his disposal, it really vividly brings to light the overall conditions of everyone. If this is someone who's relative to our world, who would be kind of middle to upper class. Next we have Shirl. Shirl is the good-looking young trophy girlfriend of a very wealthy, though obviously criminal man. And this shows how the other half lives, the ones that are actually doing the resource hoarding. And it's a very creepy contrast to the rest of the world, as you'd kind of expect it to be. And I'm not going to go into that too much, because I think that everyone who's into classic sci-fi should read this book and find out for themselves. Now, Andy and Shirl meet while he's investigating a murder, which takes us to another worldview. This is one of an almost street kid, Billy, who is the son of refugees who escaped Taiwan after a coup, They are all of them living on this rusted houseboat moored in a river. It might be the Hudson. I'm not clear on American geography, but I think they said Hudson. And so you get to see the entire refugee borderline community living on these rusting boats, and that is magnificently described. There's another worldview as well that I really liked was Sol Khan, who's 70. He's old enough to remember the taste of coffee, and the relationship between him and Andy Roosh is particularly fun to read. He's a beautifully written character, and essentially that is what is good about this book. The world building, which is spectacular, all of the characters, which each one in themselves is unique, well written, interesting, the relationships between them, which show you the world in a way that no tell versus show style of writing is ever going to do. And that's one of the things that made this book stick in my memory alive for all those decades, and I'm so glad I got it back as a chance to reread it. Even when I couldn't remember the plot all that well, and like I said, if you know the plot of the movie, that doesn't mean you know the plot of the book by any means, but even after all those decades, I remembered the book as a beautiful experience aside from the plot. And again, this should be a really well-known classic. Not Soylent Green, but this book and this author. And I really don't know why other authors that have dated far worse are so well known compared to Harry Harrison. It's a bit sad, really. Anyway, so the world building and its predictions are key to how amazing the novel is. The afterword to this book is a 2008 edition. The author actually sits down and examines how his predictions stood the test of time and how accurate they were, which they weren't terribly. They were pretty poor, which is great. The overpopulation. Now, the overpopulation is a driver in this book of how poor conditions are. And I'm not going to say that he's exactly wrong, but in one way, in one specific way, it didn't happen. In this book, in 1999, contraception is still illegal in the US and always has been. Now just imagine where the US would be today if that had been the case. There are plenty of countries around the world, and not to point cultural fingers or anything, but there are countries where contraception is illegal. And a lot of the resource problems that you find in this book can be seen in those countries. So I'm not going to say that Make Room is 100% incorrect. I'm just going to say its location, the USA and the UK, they're incorrect. And I'm not entirely sure that the contraception and the population problems aren't the reason for how different the book and predictions and the reality were. Right, the complete depletion of resources was also an overprediction, but no matter how many agencies fight it, resource depletion is ongoing as our population rises. The decimation of all nature reserves in the UK, which is mentioned in the book, that hasn't happened. The UK isn't doing too badly, but they are shrinking. They're shrinking worse here in Australia, where the Dust Bowl predictions for the USA that the book makes are actually closer to being accurate. Australia tends to have Dust Bowl fire years interspersed by drought years, but not very many really good years. Now, Harrison did not accurately predict technology levels for 1999-2000, but he did predict the nutcases advertising the end of the world. So that's a plus. Another glaring absence to me in this worldview is plastic. Plastic in the ocean is a big thing. There's probably not a single marine resource that is entirely free of plastic. Some of them are under complete collapse due to plastic. Most marine organisms now have plastic in their gut, and a large proportion of humans probably have it in their gut or their tissues as well. Plastic was not predicted. But how many people from the 60s, the mid-60s, would have been able to predict this? How many of them would have been able to foresee just how badly we have mistreated the plastic resource? Even most scientists went up with that, let alone the authors. He did accurately predict in his book massive heat waves and weather issues. His attributions weren't the same as we'd normally ascribe as reasons for them. But the heat wave in this book is actually a major part of the plot. New York, which has been getting worse and worse heat waves in this book, is suffering from the worst ever. What else? So, while it's written in 1966, it actually only has dated significantly, in my opinion, in the one way. And that is, even though it's been written as a future story, and the world building is of a future world, it feels old in the way that some movies or TV series, like, for example, I think Mad Men was one of them, Mad Men, they try to bring on the feel of the era. The feel of this book is old. It feels sort of 60s or 70s, but there's none of the grating elements you'll find in a lot of 60s science fiction. The social predictions, no, not even predictions, he isn't predicting anything, but the way he writes his society in Make Room actually feels more relevant and to today than many other books. So obviously I adored it when I first read it. I still adored it when I reread it in 2021. But thinking it over, the only real reason that I can imagine for this novel not getting the acclaim it deserves and being changed so significantly to make the movie is the ending, because this ending is dark. Where other dire science fiction predictions will end on a slightly lighter note with the hero waltzing off into the distance with future horizons and prospects, no, not here. In other ones, you might have the heroine end on a high note. It's like her future will be better. Harrison didn't do that either. The abusive society that's throughout this novel continues to the end, and so it is a depressing ending. It is really, really dark. It's harsh. When I finished it, I was depressed and dark and harsh. It took me a while to metabolize the ending and the story and be able to go on to another book. It was jarring. And I think it was jarring enough that that's probably where some of its lack of recognition comes from. And thinking it over, which I did for a while before I moved on to my next book, I've got to wonder, should it have ended lighter? Perhaps not. This is talking about a world that we have messed up so completely that there's almost no hope of future for us. Not for Andy Rush, not for his girlfriend Shell. There's no hope for the future. There's no hope for the resources. The world is dying, and unlike many science fiction, there's no spaceships to take us to Earth number 2. Is this sort of ending not the sort of ending that we should be getting for this type of book? I think it is. And I totally respect Harry Harrison for what he did with this book. It's one of the novels that I like reading. I dread the ending. I totally respect what he's done, and I do thoroughly recommend it. But maybe be prepared for the depression. Oh, and like and comment and subscribe and all those other things that YouTube is on. Have you read it? If you've read it, tell me. I want to know.